All right, well, welcome everyone to our webinar. We are very excited to share with you today how Sage Intacct can transform the accounting and reporting for your NFP. Your presenters today. Well, I'm Kevin Chives. I'm a partner here at Sensiba in our consulting group. An important part of my job here is to ensure that we are fully enabled to bring best-in-class software solutions to our clients. Joining me today is Tom Aker, Senior Solutions Consultant. Tom will be taking us through some of the NFP challenges that he's seen and then demoing the Sage Intacct solution to address those. Also with me is Michael Sudbury, a Senior Implementation Specialist. Michael will be taking us through the NFP challenges he's seen around budgeting and reporting and spend management, and he's going to show you how Sage Intacct will address these as well. First, a little bit about our firm, Sensiba Sanfilippo. SSF is a full-service accounting, consulting, and advisory firm. We have 4 offices in Northern California and serve clients across the U.S., and we've been in existence now for well over 40 years. We're also one of a handful of accounting firms that is B Corp certified, a designation that indicates that we strive to balance purpose and profits. You can find out more about that on our website at ssfllp.com. There's been a lot of interest in the B Corp certification, especially with companies that focus on sustainability. And we have a number of resources if that's something that you're looking to navigate. So please reach out. My contact info will be at the end of this slide deck, which we will be distributing to everyone on this call. Just drilling down a little bit more on our consulting group. So as you can see, we offer technology solutions. Here we partner with the best-in-class software publishers to help our clients manage their businesses in a more effective and efficient way. Our current platforms are shown in the bottom right-hand corner of this slide. We also have an internal audit and SOX offering. Here we help our clients design, document, test, evaluate, and improve their processes and procedures. This can be an engagement as small as documenting a payroll process or as large as implementing full SOX for a newly public company. We also have outsourced accounting. And just like the service name implies, clients engage with us to perform some or all of their accounting function. This allows them to focus on their core business. Also under this umbrella, we provide family office support and advisory. If you have questions about any of these, again, don't hesitate to reach out. Our agenda today, we're going to be taking you through some of the challenges that we've seen in the nonprofit accounting and reporting. And then we're going to show you, obviously, how Sage Intacct can help address all these. We're going to drill down to things like grants, fund and donor accounting, how the restrictions and releases would work in a platform like Sage, and also spend management. How do you track your budgets while you're spending money to make sure that you're not going over? There's some really neat features and functions in Sage that can help do that. Sage also comes with a variety of pre-built reports and dashboards for the nonprofit sector that are really powerful and allow us to help NFPs get up and running on the platform quickly. We're going to take you through some of that. And then finally, you've got these programs that you're managing, and you need to report on how well they're doing. So we're going to show you how you can track that performance in Sage and report on it. Okay, Tom, you want to take us through some of the challenges you've seen?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Well, in the current environment that we've been living in for the past few years, we've seen a lot of new demands that are coming to the doorstep of nonprofits. And some of those are coming from outcomes of the pandemic, ongoing housing crises, climate change impacts, social justice movements, a lot of new demands that are being put on nonprofits that need to shoulder some of these new developments. At the same time, we're seeing new funding that's come through. In some cases, it's COVID relief funding. There's been other increases in federal funding. Some of it is direct federal funding. Some of it is pass-through, but we're still seeing, of course, increased accountability under Yellow Book standards for tracking that federal funding. And we're seeing more foundation grants. I work with foundations as well as with the recipients at the nonprofits, and some of those foundations are making some extraordinary grants, largely to do with the pandemic. So we're seeing that come through, and sometimes those are unrestricted, and sometimes they come with restrictions. So that means that organizations that maybe didn't have this kind of funding before are now having to deal with more complexity in their accounting. And of course, on top of that, with the great retirement of accountants, we're seeing a shortage of accountants available for across the board, public accounting industry, and that affects nonprofits as well. At the same time, with the newer standards of revenue recognition, both in the for-profit area and then the nonprofit revenue recognitions, we're finding organizations are coming into more revenue and more complex revenue that they have not prepared or had the infrastructure to deal with before. And then lastly, we have the challenges as these additional demands and additional funding come in, that the services footprint for some organizations has grown rather quickly, and it's become harder for them to manage their spend on all of these budgets across all these programs. So we'll take a look at that too. So one of the challenges that we have seen, especially with organizations that have suddenly grown quite a lot in the last 3 years in their funding and their footprint, is that managing the relationships between grants and programs, restricted and unrestricted funds, have overwhelmed some financial managers. So in this example here, I'm looking at some one-to-one relationships between grants and programs, some many-to-one, and some one-to-many. So if you've been accounting for these kinds of relationships, this kind of matrix in a simpler accounting system, then you're probably doing a lot of this tracking and allocation using Excel, which, I mean, really, if you only had 3 funders and 3 programs, not a problem, right? But if you've got 30 programs and 30 funders and you're trying to manage all that in an Excel workbook, then it's probably pretty close to a full-time job. So if we go on to the way that we deal with this in Sage Intacct, we use something called dimensions. Now, at the center of our wheel of dimensions here, of course, every accounting system has to have a chart of accounts, and by default, you have an entity. If you're in a QuickBooks file, then that's the entity is the one company that's in that QuickBooks file. So that's the core. But in Sage Intacct, we have a multitude of other dimensions that we can apply to each transaction line, which means that we can track in the financials into the GL and across financials and charts, all these different dimension elements. So for instance, in the upper right, you see we've got site, program, and restriction. These might be segments if you're using a segmented accounting system, but they're independently operating dimensions in Sage Intacct, and I'll show you how that works and why that serves nonprofits especially well. And then on the opposite corner of the wheel, there's grants and projects. So those are the main things that I want to address today. As you can see, there's a lot of different dimensions that are available depending on the configuration and the modules that you have in your Sage Intacct. But we're talking about programs, restrictions, and grants primarily today. So under those grants, we wanted to talk a little bit about restrictions. So we have ASU 2018-08, which it is 4 years old now, and it's actually been fully implemented for 3 years. But not every organization has had the requirement, right? You haven't had maybe the funding that requires this. So let's just step through this. It's probably going to be review for a lot of you, but we're assuming here that this is a non-exchange transaction. So we do not have any kind of what's termed commensurate value or quid pro quo. Nothing is going back to the funder in exchange for the funding. So if that were the case, then it would fall under ASC 606 revenue recognition, but that's not what we're talking about today. This is where you have a contribution, but there's some decisions that we need to walk through. For one thing, is there a performance barrier? That is some kind of deliverable need to be provided to a third party recipient, or do certain metrics need to be met? And you got to have both. A right of return of funds. So does that funder get to claim back the money if we didn't meet that performance barrier, or do they not release the funds if we don't meet that performance barrier? If both of those conditions exist, then that is a conditional contribution, and we can't recognize the revenue on that until the conditions for that revenue are met. Pretty straightforward there. If it's an unconditional contribution, that is, we don't have both of those elements, then we ask whether there is a time or a usage requirement to restrict those funds. If there's no time or usage requirement, then it's just unrestricted revenue. Easy, put it into the operating budget, and away you go. If there are restrictions on it, then maybe you have a time requirement, in which case that's also pretty simple, right? You've just set up a recurring journal entry and recognize that revenue, move it from restricted to unrestricted as time goes by. But let's talk about what do we do if it is usage requirement. So we go on to the next slide. So first of all, we get some revenue. Now, in the way that I would do it in Sage Intacct is it's recognized. It is a grant that we're getting. It's either receivable or received. We tag it with a grant ID, which we'll look at in Intacct when we get to a demo here. And we tag it as with the restrictions dimension as restricted. Next, we spend some money on that grant. It's coming out of our unrestricted budget, but we're tagging it with that grant ID so that we know that it's part of that program. And then finally, we are able to use that grant ID to identify the expenses that are filling the purpose of that grant, and we can move that as we spend the money. We can recognize that revenue moving from restricted, or moving from restricted into our unrestricted. So I'm going to show you now a little bit about what I'm talking about. So in my Sage Intacct dashboard here, I have, for one thing, you can see that I've got program revenue by grant. So when I'm talking about reporting using dimensions, we've got across the top here our programs, right? That's a dimension that we looked at in the wheel. Down the left side, we have projects or grants. So we have two dimensions, and everything in the middle here is the account group, which is revenue. And it comes down here to the total of 13 million. And so that's all of our revenue, but this way we can see it, just like that matrix that I had in the slide, we can see it here, all broken out by funder and by program. So this is based on both dimensions and account groups. Similarly, in this pie chart here, I can see I've got temporarily restricted funds, mostly unrestricted money, but I got some temporarily restricted. And if I drill into that, I can see that our temporarily restricted money is a combination of contributions and grants. And I've got some satisfaction of restrictions, some release, because I have spent some of that money on eligible expenses. So I want to actually zoom in, though, for the purposes of revenue restriction releases. I'm going to expand on this graph here and look at this capital construction fund. So I got $400,000 of revenue, a combination. If I drill into it, I can see it's private contributions and a grant. But my assumption here is that this is all restricted for the purpose of building a new capital improvement to our facilities. I can see that I have expended $120,000 in that capital construction fund. And again, this is all tagged to the project of capital construction fund. And then I have released from that restriction $50,000. So if I've spent $120,000 and I've released $50,000, my assumption here is I've got some additional money that I can release and move into the unrestricted category. So to do that, and this is something that's relatively new in Sage Intacct, I'm going to set up what's called a restriction release. And so I pick my posting date. We have a specific journal in the GL that we're going to use for restriction releases so that they sort of stand apart in the general ledger. And basically, I'm going to wash this transaction through the satisfaction of restrictions revenue account. I'm moving it from temporarily restricted to unrestricted. I'm doing it in the current month for the construction expenditures account group, and I'm just focusing on the expenditures that have been spent out of that capital construction fund. So just what we were looking at in those expenditures. When I hit generate on this, it queues it up and it's going to run it in the background. It runs it on a separate set of servers, so it doesn't impact any kind of performance in real time. But I'm going to just, while that's running, I'm going to go to a previous one that I ran so we can take a look at what the output would be. So remember, we had $50,000 of released revenue on this. So I've got this journal entry here that's keeping all of the account, the fund, the program, the site, and the project all stay the same. It's only moving it between restriction from temporarily restricted to unrestricted. And I can see it's got a snapshot here of how it arrived at that calculation. And I can download a Excel spreadsheet of the details of what went into that specific restriction release. So that is a pretty cool feature of how Intacct is helping manage those restriction releases.
Excellent, Tom. Thank you. I think it's time for a polling question. Okay. Polling question is, how are you currently tracking restricted funds? Is it Excel, some accounting platform, or something we haven't thought of, other? Okay, give everybody a minute to jump in here. Remember, if you're hoping to get CPE, we need you to answer these. Most everybody's coming in now. Okay, we will end the poll and see the results. All right, so it looks like about a third are using Excel, and some folks have an accounting platform that they're working with to do that. And then we've got some other. as well. Thank you for participating in the poll. Alrighty. Now we're going to go back to our slide deck. It's Michael's turn. Michael, you want to talk a little bit about the challenges you've seen in the budgeting and spend management area?
Yes, of course. Now, good budgeting practices are pivotal to a lot of NFPs and their success. But a budget's really only as good as its management. So some of the challenges you see with budgeting are it not integrating with your spending platform, a lack of approval. So maybe a budget manager doesn't really have the approval process of like approving a budget purchase or not. You're looking at it after the fact most of the time. This is something that you're looking at a month later, maybe even longer, to see where we're at against your budget. So a lot of people really lack the visibility real time what they're spending against their budget. And Sage Intacct has a very useful tool called Spend Management that can help you manage your budget. We can go to the next slide. Now, spend management is going to allow you to validate transactions against a budget and period, and then also those dimensions that we were talking about in Intacct. We can have the ability to warn if a transaction's over budget or stop it completely. There's multiple places to where we can actually validate the budget in the Sage Intacct system, which I will show you shortly. And then also, if you're using committed expenses or encumbrances, the budget can also be factored in there with the spend management to look at your committed spend and your actuals. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the setup because I feel like that's helpful to give you a good view of what spend management is, and then we'll look at the insights it gives you when you're actually entering the transactions. So here you can see we can go into spend management. Now what it's going to take is a budget. So you will need a budget. You can define the budget that we will be validating our transactions against, and you can put that here. If you want to turn on notifications, you can turn on over budget notifications. This is going to let a budget administrator know this person's trying to push through a purchase order or a bill that is over budget, or make a journal entry that's going to put you over budget. And this will warn the administrator, and then a decision can be made as to that purchase. I was talking about dimensions. Notice here we can select multiple dimensions on the budget to validate our transactions against. So we could have it for just a program or just a grant or any number of dimensions that we want to validate our budget against. I also talked about there was different areas in the system. So within the purchasing module, we can have it to either stop or warn. With the accounts payable bills section, we also have the ability to validate the budget there and either stop or warn the transaction. And then also on the general ledger, if you are making journal entries, we also have the ability to either stop or warn there. And they don't have to be the same level of notifications or control. You can have one that says stop or one that says warn. I also spoke a little bit about committed expenses and encumbrances. You do have the ability to add that in here if you want to validate your committed expenses as part of your budget. So what does that look like if I'm actually going to enter a purchase order or a bill? So let me go over here and jump over to a purchase order. So anywhere that we configure spend insights to work, so if this was a journal entry or purchase order, you have this new show spend insight button. So what this allows us to do is have real-time visibility as the person entering the purchase order or bill and see where we're at against our budget. So you can see with this transaction, I'm entering some office supplies. I'm entering it to the facilities program. For the period, our budget is this $27,541. Our actuals are currently sitting at $22,407. We already have $5,000 of committed expenditures that is factoring into the budget. With this post, we would be at another $5,000, leaving us with $133 available left in our budget. Now, if I were to post this, this would go through. we're fine, we're good on our budget, nothing's going to happen. But what happens if I make us go over budget? So I'll go ahead and add another $500 and try to post this. So you can see here at the top, this is giving us a warning. Our transaction exceeds our budget limit. We need to either reduce that or work with our budget administrator to adjust the overage. Now, this was just the warn stage. This would be the warning, and I can click again and post it. Or if it was the hold stage, it would not let me post this until it had been reviewed by a budget administrator. Also, if we turn on those notifications, at this point, the budget administrator would have been emailed an over budget notification. So this is very useful for having that real-time insight to where you're at in your budget when you're spending, and also having those added controls to help you keep from going over budget. So that is pretty much it for spend management.
Okay, Michael, if you stop sharing, thank you. I'll bring back the slide. And Michael, next, why don't you talk about the quick start reports and dashboards that Sage brings to bear here?
Absolutely. So reporting is very, very powerful in Sage Intacct, and Sage Intacct also has nonprofits in mind. They have built quick start libraries of reporting that you may need right out of the bat in formats that are commonly needed for nonprofits. That also goes with dashboards. They have quick start dashboards that are easy to build, and also the ability to use role-based dashboards in your organization, giving the user the information they may need on a daily basis. So I'd also like to go through and walk you through that. So with some of those quick start libraries that I was talking about, we can look at the report center first. With the use of the quick start library, you can see here, these are reports pre-built by Intacct for nonprofits. So you can see we have a statement of functional expenses in a 990 format, some other reporting down here. And you see also like a statement of activities in a 117 format, a statement of activities in a 958 format. So all of this reporting built with nonprofits in mind. And if you're ever curious what some of these quick starts might look like, we do have a layout view here to where you can see what the report may look like, just not with actuals populated in it yet. One other thing I wanted to highlight is I spoke about encumbrance reporting and like what that might look like. So let me go and show you one of my favorite reports here. So once again, with that committed and actual and budgeting in mind, you can see here that we have a statement of functional expenses. We have our operating budget. It shows our actuals, our commitments, and then the remaining budget, keeping those commitments and or encumbrances in mind. So just great visibility to spending and your commitments and where you're at with your budget. Now I want to highlight the dashboard section. So with the dashboards, like the report center, we have a quick start library. So these are going to be NFP focused dashboards that are already built out by the system that you can use right away. Of course, all of these quick start dashboards and reports can be customized. So they're also a good template to customize your reports later on if there are pieces of it you like. What does one of those quick start dashboards look like? We'll take a quick view of the NFP quick start dashboard. And this is a financial dashboard. So you can see here, this dashboard is going to show your net assets, statement of activities, some cash balances. So things that are relevant to the financial health of your NFP. Now, that's nice, but it may not be applicable to all users. So another thing that's very useful in the dashboarding section that you can set up are role-based dashboards. So I want to highlight that as well. So you really want to put on a dashboard what's going to be important information for the user, every day. So I can have an AP dashboard that has the important information for my AP manager. So what are my accounts payable at this month? What are my intercompany payables? How is my cash looking? And then you can see here also a vendor aging right on this report. All these are also, you're able to filter these as well for different as of dates for different periods. And I'll highlight that in my next selection of the CFO dashboard. So this dashboard is going to look a little bit different. You can see here we have performance cards indicating how our financial health is doing. Also other reports that you might want to see as a CFO. And note that this doesn't have to end at just reports and graphs. You can actually have within the dashboard features that help you operate in the system. So with the CFO dashboard, there you can see here there is a section for approved purchases. If there were purchases out there pending my approval as the CFO, I would be able to see that here right on my dashboard and act on it from there. So that's very helpful. One of the other things here is you can add multiple filters to a dashboard. So if you see here, I can go back to December 31st and apply the filter, and it's going to update the entire dashboard and all the reports to run on this window. Now that doesn't just stop there. We can also bring in the different dimensions of Intacct as well. So if I'm looking at, let's just say the food service program, I can look at everything coded in the financials for the food services and update my reports to only show that information. So with that, you can do one dimension, or you can do a combination of any of the dimensions. So we can look at programs with a certain grant, or just a certain grant, or a combination of all of them. So it gives you the ability to slice and dice the information to get exactly what you're looking for in a really quick and easy manner. So if I was looking for just one grant, I would be able to select that as well, apply the filter, and it's all those reports and all that information for that updated dimension within Intacct. So dashboards are something that are very powerful, very customizable, and there's a lot you can do with it. What it's really going to do is give you quick insight to where you're at financially, and also give you quick access to things that you may be doing daily. So it's something that you definitely would want to utilize in your organization.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I think it's time for another polling question. All right. How are you currently controlling your spending against budget? We've got a couple of choices here. Maybe you're circulating emails, the honor system, seen that a few times. Maybe you're using Excel and perhaps other. Wait for everybody to have a chance to come in. Okay, give it a few more moments here. All right, looks like we got pretty much everybody at this point. I'll end the poll and share the results. So it looks like 2/3 of folks are using Excel, and then there's something other. So not too surprising results there. Thank you for participating in the poll. Okay, back to the slide prezzo here. Tom, can you take us through an example of an outcome measurement and how that would be reflected in Sage Intacct?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So M&E, as I put in the header here, that's monitoring and evaluation. In the nonprofit world, I'm sure that you run across this. A lot of organizations are very focused on that monitoring and evaluation, that M&E initiative. And a lot of organizations are just getting started with it and figuring out what are the key indicators that are driving or reflecting the work that they're doing in the field. And what we use in our Sage Intacct environment for that is something called statistical accounts, which can then be combined into statistical account groups. I have a hard time saying statistical over and over again. But the upshot is that we're able to pull indicators, the source data, and make some KPIs, some key performance indicators for those outcomes, and display them in a dashboard. So I'm going to just walk through how we first of all, how we arrive at what we're trying to calculate, and then how do we build the blocks to make that function in a Sage Intacct environment. So in my sample here, which I have no imagination, so I just copied this from a great little nonprofit website called toolsfordev.org. And in this example here, we're dealing with an operation that is providing schooling in a place where grade 6 is primary school and grade 7 is the beginning of high school. And what we want to know, one of our mission outcomes is, are we getting students into that high school entry from 6th grade, right? So our programs are presumably geared to make that happen, and we want to see, are we getting that outcome, right? So in this example, we've got, it's a pretty simple little calculation here. We've got 80 students that are starting the first day of grade 7, and there were 175 that were in grade 6 at the end of the last school year, and I'm just making up that the school year is like a school year here. And with that, let me go over to the Sage Intacct environment and show you how I will construct that. So we're back on another dashboard here. We love our dashboards. So this one here, we have a set of outcomes dashboards in our demo environment here. And because we're talking about a school situation, I picked the one that's school metrics. And this is already pre-built with some good metrics. And I want to talk a little bit here about account groups, which is key to managing all this stuff in Sage Intacct. So right here we have tuition total. Now that's pretty straightforward. It is a financial account group. If I click on that number, I can drill into the amounts that make that up in the financial system, and I could drill down to the general ledger detail from here. The other kind of account group that we're seeing in this dashboard, in this performance card here for student enrollment, we have just a statistical number, right? So we're just capturing the metrics on that student enrollment, and if I click onto that, I can see how our student enrollment has changed from year to year. And then because we have these two elements, the statistical account group and the financial account group, we can use what's called a computational account group to actually figure out what our average tuition is for students. So this, I can't drill into this because it's a calculation, but it's just the math of how much tuition divided by how many students, right? So that's how we get to that. There's really no limit on how many different kinds of statistics and metrics we can track in Sage Intacct. And as with the financial accounts, we can break up those statistical entries by multiple dimensions so that we're able to do that slice and dice on dimensions as well as, or on statistics as well as on financials. And you can see that in this chart right here where we're looking at students. There's the counseling services program has that many students, and so that's broken out by dimension, and then we can again calculate a computational account group here of cost per student so that we can see exactly how we're doing at spending our money serving our students. But this isn't the outcome, right? We were talking about the outcome of getting kids from 6th grade to 7th grade. So let me show you how we can capture that and measure it. So first of all, I created a, well, actually, I'm gonna go here. I created a couple of accounts. I have statistical accounts for grade 6 students that are finishing. So to get to this, let's go to my general ledger statistical accounts. You see, we have general ledger financial accounts and statistical accounts. And of course, this demo company is chock full of them, but I created these two right here, grade 6 students finishing, grade 7 students starting. So these are just accounts. And then I made a statistical journal entry to record those sample numbers. Okay, so this is just how the number of grade 7 students that were starting out of the sixth grade students that finished. Pretty straightforward. And then I created a computational account group to track that percent, just as we were doing in that slide. So I have a total, I've got called it percent of students continuing to grade 7. It's simple math. I've got the grade 7 students statistic divided by the grade 6. I'm going to display it as a decimal or as a percent. I've got a number of choices here, but I'm going to show it as a percent with 2 decimal places. Now, how do I use that in my dashboard? I'm going to put this, in this case, in a performance card. So performance cards are what we have across the top here. I could track it as we've seen in both performance cards, in charts, in reports. But in this case, to make it pretty clear, I'm going to use a performance card. As Michael pointed out, there's a lot of different kinds of components that we can put into a dashboard. But we like the performance cards because they give us a quick hit of information and trends. So I'm going to call this one percent students continuing. I'm going to use that account group that we just looked at, right? Percent students continuing. Now I want to report not on the current month, that's the default, but I have a whole bunch of different reporting periods I can choose from here. What I really want is the current year, right? Because they only graduate from 6th to 7th grade once a year, presumably. I want to show it as a percentage. And rather than a whole number, I want to see it with no rounding so that I have the complete accuracy. Now, I'm just going to use the statistical, so I don't really need to worry about reporting books here. For the comparison, I want to compare to the prior period. So since I'm using current year as my reporting period, this is going to automatically compare to the prior year. And then I can have a choice of icons to show how that trend looks. So I'm going to use a face on this one. So let me make sure I've got everything right here. I've got my account group. It's formatted as percentage, and I'm going to show that period difference. You can also, I'm not going to do it on this one, but you have the availability of adding filters on the report card or on the performance card. But I prefer not to do that because, as Michael illustrated, we have filters on the dashboard itself. So let me save that. Okay, so there we see, there's our number, the same number that we calculated on our slide, 45.71%, a little bit more precise than I had. And it's trending upward versus the prior year, so we get a smiley face for that one. Now we can populate a whole dashboard of key metrics and provide that to, for instance, your board or something like that. And the other thing is collecting these can be really complicated for some organizations that are, you know, have a global reach and have a lot of people maybe out in the field. So collecting information about, you know, clean water or wildlife or something like that. And I worked with one organization that was using Google Sheets on mobile devices and you can put the data into a formatted Google Sheet, turn that into a CSV back at the headquarters, and put that into a CSV and upload it straight into Sage Intacct, populate that. So that's how we can do some cool M&E outcomes with Sage Intacct.
Hey, Tom. Yeah, very powerful. Thank you for that. Can you just talk a little bit? You mentioned distributing information to like board members. Can you just talk a little bit about how we've seen clients successfully do that with dashboards?
Yeah. So what we can do is when we build a dashboard, we can put permissions on it that give it availability to specific people or a group of users. And with board members, what we have done is set them up as what we call employee users, which they have a login to Sage Intacct, but they're really mostly read-only. So they can access their dashboard and they can look at their reports. If given specific permissions, they could drill into the underlying detail, but we don't have to let them. We can really control that very finely in the dashboard and in the reports.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. Okay, I think it's time for another polling question. All right, how many grant-funded programs are you currently managing? Got a couple of different tranches there. Give everyone a chance to jump in. Okay, looks like we're there. I'll go ahead and share the results. And it looks like we've got somewhere between 6 and 20 is the distribution. Thank you everyone for participating in that. And we'll move on. Okay, gonna go back to the deck now. Okay, so successful nonprofits that have trusted Sage Intacct for their accounting and reporting. There's a ton. I've put up on this what we call our NASCAR screen, just some of the great organizations that have gone down this road and been very successful with it. It's way more than you see here. This is one of the fastest growing verticals for Sage Intacct, and it's also one of the fastest growing verticals for us. We love working with not-for-profit and seeing how we can be instrumental in saving them time and money in their accounting so they can focus on their mission. And so it's very exciting to be a part of this. This slide here, I always like to share this because, well, just to orient you a little bit. So G2 is one of, if you're not familiar, is one of these organizations that goes around and they try to do an impartial ranking of different software on a variety of different metrics. This slide, what it is telling you here is that Sage Intacct is #1 in the highest for satisfaction amongst all of the other software out there in the nonprofit area. And we're especially proud of this rating because obviously we don't want to bring anything to our clients that they're not going to be happy with. And I can tell you, I didn't need G2 to tell us this because we see it every day when we're working with our nonprofit clients. So we haven't spent a lot of time talking about this, but we wouldn't want to not mention the fact that Sage Intacct, one of the great things about this platform is it's an open API. And if you don't know what that specifically means, it basically is saying that Sage Intacct plays well with other software. And it means that we can integrate easily with other systems in your environment, be it a CRM, maybe you've got a fixed asset or payment system payroll that you really like and you're not looking to move off of that, it's with this platform, it's very easy to do that integration. And again, at the bottom there, you'll see that I state that there's over 200 vendors, software publishers in the Sage Intacct marketplace. It's kind of like the App Store, and these companies have built integrations already to Sage Intacct, and they've been vetted by Sage Intacct as well. So that's a great opportunity to expand and use the best-in-class software out there to integrate with your accounting software. Okay, so just a recap of where we've been today. So Tom and Michael went through a lot of the challenges that they've seen in their client base and how we use Sage Intacct to bring some relief there. We talked about, how we could do that with grants and funds and deal with all the donor restrictions and releases in a very systematic and adept way. Michael talked about spend management, not just looking at your budget to actual after the fact and being kind of not too happy about the results, but rather managing your spend as you're going to make sure that you stay in line with your budget in a very systematic way. Michael also walked us through the reporting capabilities, the reports library and the dashboard library, and how we can use those pre-built elements to rapidly deploy value to our NFP clients. And then Tom, he took us through the example of the outcome metrics and how you could put those in the system and then report on them out to all the interested stakeholders. And of course, we also did I did myself a little Sage Intacct overview and some of the things that we're really excited about with Sage. Okay, well, thank you everyone for today. Do we have another polling question? I think we had one more that we need to get through. All right, this will be the last one. And it is, has your funding increased, decreased, or stayed consistent over the last 2 years? All right, just give everybody a chance to jump in here. Couple more seconds. All right, I think we're there. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. And the answer is most everybody saw an increase. It's an 80-20 split. Thank you for participating in that poll. And now we will open it up to general questions. Kaylin, do you see any questions out there that we can answer at this time?
Hey, Kevin, we actually got a really good question in the Q&A section, and it says, we are a Habitat for Humanity. How would we capture the cost of building a home, and are we able to allocate expenses?
Ooh, that's a good one. Tom, you want to take that? I know you've had some experience with that recently.
Yeah, well, for the actual building of the homes, what we would use is that same dimension that we used for grants is also used for projects. And so we can have a single project for a home development, or we might make it into a few projects with parent-child relationships, depending on how we want to do that. And then we can allocate using either the transaction allocation, which is a pretty straightforward standard percent-based spread of expenses between different projects, or in some cases we've used Sage dynamic allocations, which then uses one of those statistical accounts that we were looking at, let's say square footage, and allocates the costs from the overhead to the various homes based on the square footage. Those are a couple of options of the many that are available there, but we've done that very successfully.
Absolutely, thank you, Tom. And if whoever asked that question wants to know more about that, please reach out. We'd love to chat with you about it. Anything else, Kaylin?
Yes, Kevin, we actually got a question on pricing.
Oh, always a good one. So here's what I can tell you about pricing. It's obviously it's based on the scope of your system and of your organization, clearly. So what we do is obviously go through those details with you and come to what a price would be. But one thing you should note is that because this is such a big vertical with Sage Intacct, they out of the gate give all NFPs a 20% discount off of list at the very start. So we really appreciate that, and we love sharing that with our clients. Okay, I think we're at time. I'd like to thank everyone for participating today. We enjoyed being with you, and please reach out with any other questions that we didn't get to, and have a great rest of your day.